Marcus Vale's boots crunched through fresh snow as he made his way deeper into the Nordic ruins. The beam from his headlamp cut through the darkness, illuminating ancient stone walls covered in frost and worn runes. As the lead archaeologist for the Uppsala University expedition, he'd spent months tracking down this particular site, hidden deep within the Arctic Circle. "Professor Vale, you need to see this." Emma Larsson, his graduate student, called from an adjacent chamber. Her voice echoed off the frozen walls, carrying a note of excitement that made Marcus quicken his pace. He ducked under a partially collapsed archway, careful not to disturb the precarious stonework above. The chamber beyond opened into a vast circular room, its domed ceiling reaching up into darkness. His breath frosted in the beam of his light as he took in the scene before him. At the chamber's center stood a stone dais, and upon it rested something that made his heart skip a beat, a crown. Not the crude circlets common to Norse burial sites, but an intricate piece of craftsmanship that seemed to defy its apparent age. Delicate strands of silver and gold intertwined like frost patterns, studded with gems that caught his light and threw it back in prismatic bursts. "This shouldn't be here," he muttered, approaching carefully. "The craftsmanship is all wrong for the period." He pulled out his camera, documenting everything before proceeding further. Emma stood at the edge of the dais, her notepad forgotten in her mittened hands. "The runes around the base, they're like nothing I've seen before. Some appear to be Elder Futhark, but others." She trailed off, shaking her head. Marcus knelt to examine the inscriptions. She was right. Amid the familiar Norse runes were symbols that seemed to shift and change as he looked at them, making his eyes water. "Let's get the lighting set up. Full documentation before we touch anything." They worked methodically, setting up portable LED work lights that pushed back the darkness. With each new angle revealed, the crown seemed to become more impossible. The metalwork was too fine, the gems too perfectly cut for the technology available in the Viking Age. "Professor," Emma said suddenly, "look at this section of text." She pointed to a series of runes that seemed to glow faintly in the artificial light. "It repeats 3 times around the base. I think it's a warning." Marcus leaned in closer, trying to make sense of the strange symbols. As he did, he felt an odd sensation, like static electricity raising the hair on his arms. The temperature, already well below freezing, seemed to drop further. "Pack it up," he said abruptly, straightening. "Something's not right here. We'll come back with a full team and proper dash." A sound like cracking ice echoed through the chamber. Marcus spun around to see fine fractures spreading across the chamber's floor, racing toward the dais. Acting on instinct, he lunged for the crown. If the floor collapsed, they couldn't risk losing such a priceless artifact. His fingers closed around the icy metal just as Emma shouted a warning. The crown was stuck fast to the stone, requiring more force than he'd anticipated. With a sharp tug, it came free, along with a distinct crack. Time seemed to stop. Marcus stared in horror at the hair-thin fracture now running through one of the crown's delicate arches. The gems flickered like dying stars, and the temperature plummeted so rapidly that his next breath crystallized in front of him. "Run," he shouted to Emma, but his voice was drowned out by a sound like shattering glaciers. The crown in his hands began to glow with an intense blue-white light that burned through his gloves. He tried to drop it, but his fingers wouldn't respond. The light spread up his arms like living frost, and with it came a voice that seemed to bypass his ears and speak directly into his mind. "After 1,000 years, I am awakened. And you, breaker of the seal, are now bound to my will." The light exploded outward, filling the chamber with impossible brightness. When it faded, Marcus found himself on his knees, the crown still clutched in his burning hands. The chamber had transformed. Gone was the ice and decay of ages. The stones gleamed as if newly cut, and upon the dais where the crown had rested stood a woman. She was tall, with pale skin that seemed to contain its own subtle luminescence. Her hair was the white of glaciers, falling in intricate braids past her waist, woven with threads of gold and silver that matched the crown in Marcus's hands. Her eyes, when they fixed upon him, were the deep blue of Arctic ice, with pupils that seemed to contain swirling snowflakes. "Rise," she commanded, her voice carrying the same otherworldly resonance he'd heard in his mind. When Marcus found himself standing without conscious decision, he realized with growing dread that it hadn't been a request, his body had simply obeyed. "I am Astrid, Queen of the Frozen Realm, Keeper of the Winter Crown, and Guardian of the Seal." She descended the dais with fluid grace, her gown of frost and starlight moving like water. "And you, Marcus Vale, have broken my crown." Marcus tried to speak, but his voice failed him. How did she know his name? His mind raced through possible explanations: hallucination brought on by hypothermia, hidden technology, elaborate hoax, but none could account for what he was experiencing. "The crown cannot be destroyed," Astrid continued, reaching out to take it from his unresisting hands. "But its breaking has consequences. The seal is weakened, and the binding magic requires compensation." Her fingers traced the fracture, frost spreading from her touch. "I don't understand," Marcus managed to say. "What seal? What binding?" "You will learn." Her smile was beautiful and terrible, like the Arctic itself. "The crown bound me in sleep for a millennium, holding back forces your modern world has forgotten. Now that bond is transferred to you, Marcus Vale. Until the crown is restored, your fate is tied to mine. Your will is bound to my own." To demonstrate, she lifted a hand. Marcus felt his body turn in a complete circle, puppet-like. Terror and fascination warred in his mind as the implications became clear. This was real. Impossibly, undeniably real. "Please," he said, finding his voice again. "My colleague, Emma Dash, has been removed to safety," Astrid interrupted. "Time flows differently in my presence. To her, you simply disappeared in a flash of light. She will raise the alarm, searches will be conducted, but they will find nothing. You belong to me now, Marcus Vale, until you can complete the trials necessary to restore my crown." "Trials?" The word came out as barely a whisper. 3 tasks, each impossible by mortal means. Complete them, restore my crown, and you will be free. Fail. Her smile widened, showing teeth like icicles. "Well, 1,000 years is nothing to one such as I. Perhaps you will learn to enjoy serving as my mortal anchor to this world." The chamber began to fade around them, walls turning to swirling snow. Marcus felt reality sliding away, his last glimpse of the normal world dissolving like frost in sunlight. "Your first trial begins now, Crownbreaker," Astrid's voice echoed in his mind. "Welcome to the Frozen Realm." As consciousness slipped away, Marcus's last coherent thought was that he should have listened to Emma about the warning runes. Then the snow took him, and he fell into darkness as cold as a midwinter night. Marcus awoke to the sound of ice crystals chiming like bells. He lay on a bed that seemed carved from a single massive glacier, yet felt warm to the touch. The chamber around him defied physics. Walls of transparent ice contained intricate frozen gardens, flowers, and vines perfectly preserved in eternal winter. "The mortal awakens," Queen Astrid's voice drifted from a balcony overlooking an endless expanse of snow-covered peaks. "Come. Your education begins." His body moved before his mind could protest, carrying him to stand beside her. The vista before them stretched impossibly far, mountain ranges that couldn't exist on Earth, auroras that danced in impossible colors, and far below, a city built entirely of ice and light. "Welcome to Isfel, capital of the Frozen Realm," Astrid said, her voice carrying notes of both pride and sadness. "Once, it was the seat of power for 9 immortal kingdoms. Now, it stands as the last bastion against what lies beneath the ice." "What exactly am I bound to?" Marcus asked, fighting to keep his voice steady. "What are these trials you mentioned?" Astrid turned to face him, her eyes swirling with snowflakes. The crown you broke was more than mere regalia. It was a seal, binding ancient powers that would devour your world as readily as ours. My sleep maintained that seal for a millennium. Now. She gestured, and the fracture in the crown appeared as a glowing line in the air between them. 3 trials you must complete, using both your mortal knowledge and the fraction of my power now flowing through your veins. Complete them, and the crown will be restored. Fail, and you must take my place as guardian, bound to this realm until another takes up the burden. And what makes these trials impossible? Marcus asked, his academic mind already analyzing the situation despite his fear. A smile played at the corners of Astrid's lips. The first requires you to retrieve the Sword of Summer's light from the depths of the Well of Memories. The second demands you win a game of riddles against the Archive, which has never known defeat. And the third? Her smile faded. The third will require you to make a choice that will break your heart, regardless of what you decide. Before Marcus could question her further, a horn blast echoed across the frozen city. Astrid's expression hardened as she turned toward the sound. It seems our time for explanation has run short, she said. The breaking has begun sooner than I feared. Dark shapes moved across the distant mountains, like living shadows that devoured the eternal auroras. Where they passed, the ice turned black and began to crack. What's happening? Marcus asked, though part of him dreaded the answer. The seals are failing faster than anticipated, Astrid replied. The crown's breaking has awakened things long dormant. The frozen realm is vast, but time moves differently here. We have perhaps 3 days in your mortal realm before the barriers fail completely. She waved her hand, and a map of ice crystals formed in the air between them. The Well of Memories lies here, beneath the mountain of first snows. Normally, the journey would take weeks, but I can transport you closer. However. She paused, studying him intently. The power required will weaken me further. Once there, you will be largely on your own. How am I supposed to survive in this realm, let alone complete these trials? Marcus demanded. I'm an archaeologist, not a warrior or a mage. You are what the crown chose, Astrid said simply. Through our binding, you can channel small amounts of my power. Learning to use it, well, that will be part of your trial. To demonstrate, she touched his forehead. Ice-cold energy surged through Marcus's veins. When he lifted his hand in surprise, snowflakes danced around his fingers. The power responds to will and knowledge, Astrid explained. Your understanding of the past, of patterns and preservation, these are not so different from the magics of my realm. Trust your instincts, Crownbreaker. They may surprise you. Another horn blast sounded, closer this time. The shadows on the mountains were spreading rapidly, and Marcus could now see shapes moving within them, twisted forms that seemed to absorb light itself. Time grows short, Astrid said. The Well of Memories is protected by 3 guardians, the echo of what was, the mirror of what is, and the shadow of what may be. Each will test you in their own way. The Sword of Summer's light lies in the deepest chamber, but reaching it. She trailed off as the ground trembled beneath them. What aren't you telling me? Marcus asked, noting the concern in her otherwise impassive features. The well contains memories of all who have ever entered it, she said after a moment. Including those who failed their trials. Their echoes remain, trapped between moments. They will try to add you to their number. Before Marcus could process this new information, Astrid raised her hands. A circle of ice crystals rose around them, spinning faster and faster until they became a blur of light. Remember, her voice echoed in his mind as the world began to fade, the power flows from knowledge and will. Trust what you know, Crownbreaker. The memories in the well are real, but reality itself is more fluid here than in your world. Use that to your advantage. The last thing Marcus saw before the transportation magic took hold was a massive shadow passing over Isfel, and within it, eyes that burned with ancient malice. Then everything dissolved into swirling snow, and he felt himself falling through space and time toward his first trial. He caught one final whisper from Astrid in his mind, "Take care in the well of memories, Marcus Vale." Not all that was buried there was meant to be remembered. The snow-filled void gave way to solid ground, and Marcus found himself standing before a massive archway carved into a mountain of pure ice. Ancient runes glowed along its surface, and from deep within came the sound of water flowing upward, defying gravity just as everything else in this impossible realm seemed to do. Taking a deep breath of the frigid air, Marcus stepped forward. He had 3 days to complete an impossible task, with powers he didn't understand, in a realm that shouldn't exist. As he crossed the threshold into the well of memories, he couldn't help but think that if he survived this, it would make for one hell of a research paper, assuming anyone would ever believe him. The darkness of the well swallowed him, and somewhere in its depths, the first guardian stirred, preparing to test this latest intruder into its domain. The trial had begun. The well of memories descended in a spiral, its walls embedded with crystals that pulsed with soft blue light. Marcus traced his fingers along the ice-smooth stone, his archaeological training taking over despite the circumstances. The construction was impossible, layers of different historical periods seemed to exist simultaneously, with Norse runes overlapping Roman architecture that somehow merged with far older patterns he couldn't identify. "Welcome, Breaker of Crowns," a voice echoed from below. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, speaking in all languages at once. "I am the echo of what was, first guardian of the well. Prepare to face your past." The spiral path ended at a vast circular chamber. In its center, a column of water flowed upward, defying gravity. But what caught Marcus's attention were the figures emerging from the walls, transparent forms crafted from living memory. He recognized the first scene immediately. Himself at age 12, standing before his father's grave. The memory Marcus turned, eyes full of accusation. "You chose your research over family. Always digging up the past while the present slipped away." Marcus felt the words like physical blows. "That's not true," he protested, but more scenes were materializing. His ex-wife Catherine on their last day together. "You're never really here, Marcus. Even when you're home, your mind is centuries away." Colleagues from failed expeditions, graduate students he'd disappointed, opportunities missed while pursuing his obsessions, the echo was weaving them all into a tapestry of regret. But something wasn't right. Marcus forced himself to think past the emotional impact, analyzing the scenes with his researcher's eye. "These memories," he said slowly, "they're curated. Selected and arranged to tell a specific story." The echo's voice held a note of surprise. "You perceive more than most, Crownbreaker." "I'm an archaeologist," Marcus replied, growing more confident. "Context is everything. These memories are real, but they're being presented without their full context. Like artifacts arranged to support a predetermined narrative." He stepped forward, channeling a fraction of the ice magic Astrid had given him. Frost spread from his feet, and new memories crystallized in the air, the students he'd mentored to success, the discoveries that had advanced human knowledge, the lives his research had touched. "The past isn't just about regret," he declared. "It's about learning, understanding, growing. That's what archaeology taught me." The echo was silent for a long moment. Then, "Well reasoned, Crownbreaker. But knowledge of the past is not enough. The mirror of what is awaits below." The floor beneath Marcus dissolved, and he fell into deeper darkness. He landed in another chamber, this one lined with mirrors of black ice. His reflection stared back at him from every surface, but each showed a slightly different version of himself. "I am the mirror of what is," a new voice announced, sharp as cracking ice. "Your past may be fixed, but your present contains infinite possibilities. Which reflection is real, crown breaker. Marcus turned slowly, studying each version of himself. Some showed him as he wished to be, confident, powerful, mastering the ice magic with ease. Others revealed his fears, broken, frozen, consumed by the dark forces threatening this realm. But one reflection caught his attention because it was utterly ordinary, just himself, exactly as he was, flaws and strengths alike. "They're all real," he said finally. "Every possibility exists until we choose. But this one," he touched the ordinary reflection, "this is the truth I choose to face." The mirror beneath his fingers shattered, but instead of breaking apart, it transformed into a staircase leading down to the final chamber. The mirror's voice held grudging respect. "Truth in the present is harder to face than truth about the past. Proceed, crown breaker. The shadow of what may be hungers for your fear." The last chamber was darkness made manifest. No crystals lit the walls, no water flowed. Only a pedestal of black ice rose from the center, holding what had to be the sword of summer's light, though it currently lay dark and dormant. "Such certainty you showed above," a voice whispered from the shadows. "But the future holds no such clarity." The darkness took shape, showing Marcus visions of what might come. He saw the barriers between realms crumbling, ancient horrors pouring into his world. He watched cities freeze, civilizations fall, an eternal winter descending upon Earth. But worse were the personal visions, himself corrupted by power, becoming a willing servant to the darkness, or spending centuries trapped in this realm, slowly losing his humanity. "Stop," Marcus commanded, his voice stronger than he felt. "The future isn't written. That's what makes it different from the past." "But patterns repeat," the shadow countered. "The cycle turns. What was buried rises again." "Then we learn from the past to change the future," Marcus replied. He reached for the sword, but dark tentacles of shadow wrapped around his arm. "The sword requires a price," the shadow hissed. "To wield summer's light, you must sacrifice a truth you hold dear. Choose, your knowledge of the past, your understanding of the present, or your hope for the future." Marcus hesitated, then smiled. "No. That's not the real choice at all." He touched the sword with his free hand, channeling every bit of ice magic he could muster. "The past teaches us patterns. The present gives us power to act. The future offers hope for change. They're not separate truths to sacrifice, they're all part of the same story." The sword blazed to life, golden light burning away the shadows. As Marcus grasped its hilt, he felt knowledge flow into him. The weapon was both artifact and key, its light meant to illuminate truth rather than destroy. "Clever, clever crown breaker," the shadow's voice faded. "But remember, what is illuminated cannot be hidden again. The truth you've claimed will burn in your hands until journey's end." The chamber began to dissolve around him, transportation magic pulling him back to Isfel. As he traveled through the void, Marcus clutched the sword tightly, its warm light a stark contrast to the ice magic flowing through his veins. He'd passed the first trial, but the sword's light revealed something troubling: patterns in the ice, ancient writings that hinted at a deeper game being played. Queen Astrid had spoken truth about the trials, but Marcus was beginning to suspect she hadn't told him everything about why he was really here. As Isfel's ice spires materialized around him, he knew one thing for certain: the next trial would require more than just understanding the past. He needed to uncover the truth about the present, before the future spiraled beyond anyone's control. Marcus materialized in Astrid's throne room, the sword of summer's light pulsing warmly in his grip. The queen stood at her window, watching dark clouds gather over the mountains. When she turned, her eyes fixed immediately on the sword. "You've succeeded where hundreds failed," she said, but there was tension in her voice. "Though I sense you've brought back more than just the sword." "The shadow was right," Marcus replied. "Once illuminated, truth can't be hidden again." He raised the sword, its golden light revealing ancient text carved into the ice walls, text that hadn't been visible before. You weren't imprisoned to protect our realm from yours. You were imprisoned to protect both realms from something else. Astrid's mask of imperial distance cracked slightly. Clever mortal. What else did the Well's memories show you? The 9 kingdoms didn't fall, they were sacrificed. Your crown isn't just a seal, it's a key. And you. He met her gaze steadily. You weren't the guardian. You were the jailer. Ice crackled around them as Astrid's power responded to her emotions. Would you judge me, Crownbreaker? You who have seen only fragments of the truth. I'm an archaeologist, Marcus answered. Fragments are what we work with. The sword showed me patterns in the ice, 9 kingdoms, 9 crowns, 9 sacrifices. But your crown was different. It was meant to lock something away forever. The void beneath, Astrid whispered. An entity older than winter itself. It devoured the other kingdoms from within, corrupting their rulers with promises of power. Her composure slipped further. I was the only one who saw the pattern in time. The only one who understood what had to be done. The sword's light grew brighter, illuminating more text. Marcus translated as he read, 9 crowns freely given, 9 realms willingly bound, 9 rulers eternally frozen, but 1 crown to seal the darkness, 1 queen to maintain the watch. My siblings, Astrid said softly. The other rulers. They agreed to the sacrifice, allowing their essence to be bound into their crowns. The power of 9 kingdoms, channeled into a prison of ice and memory. But someone had to remain conscious, had to maintain the seals. You, Marcus realized. You didn't just imprison yourself, you imprisoned your own people, your entire realm, keeping them in endless winter to prevent the void from spreading. And now the crown is broken. Astrid's laugh held no humor. 1,000 years of sacrifice undone by a curious archaeologist. But Marcus was shaking his head, the sword's light revealing more patterns. No, the crown was already weakening. That's why it let me find the ruins, why it practically called to me. You were failing. Astrid's silence confirmed his theory. The sword's light caught tears of ice on her cheeks. 1,000 years is a long time to maintain such power, she admitted finally. Even for an immortal. The void has been pushing against the seals, wearing them down. I knew eventually someone would have to be called, someone with the right combination of knowledge and initiative. You chose me, Marcus said. It wasn't a question. The crown chose you. Your obsession with the past, your ability to see patterns, your willingness to sacrifice comfort for knowledge, these were traits we needed. The breaking of the crown wasn't an accident. It was an awakening. Before Marcus could respond, a deep rumble shook the palace. Through the windows, they could see the dark clouds taking shape, a vast, writhing mass of void stuff that devoured the eternal auroras. The second trial, Astrid said urgently. The archive. You must go now, while dash. She was cut off as something massive struck the palace. Ice walls cracked, and through them poured living shadows with eyes of ancient malice. Too late, Astrid breathed. They've breached the outer defenses. Marcus raised the sword, its light forcing the shadows back. What aren't you telling me? What's the real purpose of these trials? Survival, Astrid replied, her power crystallizing the air around them. But not as you imagine it. The crown must be restored, yes, but not to maintain the prison. That time is past. The trials aren't about proving your worth, Marcus. They're about preparing you for what comes next. The shadows were gathering, taking on more solid form. Marcus caught glimpses of things that defied comprehension, geometries that hurt his mind to look at, beings that existed in too many dimensions at once. The archive holds knowledge that was old when the 9 kingdoms were young, Astrid continued, backing toward him as the shadows pressed closer. Knowledge you'll need for what's coming. The prison is failing, has been failing for centuries. We need a new solution. And the third trial? Marcus asked, already suspecting the answer. Will require you to choose, Astrid confirmed. Not between good and evil, but between equally terrible necessities. But first she raised her hands, ice power gathering around them. First we must survive this assault. Are you ready to learn what your new powers can really do, Crownbreaker? Marcus adjusted his grip on the sword, feeling ice magic and summer's light mix within him. I don't suppose you could have mentioned all this before sending me into the well? A genuine smile touched Astrid's lips. Would you have believed me? Sometimes truth must be discovered to be understood. Her expression hardened as the shadows began to take final form. Now, let me teach you how to fight like a ruler of winter. The void beings surged forward, and the battle for Isfel began. As Marcus fought beside Astrid, wielding sword and ice magic together, he couldn't help but think that his next academic paper, if he survived to write it, would need one hell of a methodology section. The archive was burning. Not with ordinary fire, but with void flames that consumed knowledge itself. Marcus and Astrid fought their way through its crystalline corridors, the sword of summer's light barely holding back the encroaching darkness. The knowledge chamber is ahead, Astrid called, her ice magic freezing another void being solid. Everything we need to know about the original binding ritual is there. Marcus nodded grimly, the sword singing in his hands as it cleaved through shadow stuff. The archive's mysteries had been revealed to him over hours of mental combat with its keeper, riddles within riddles, each answer revealing another layer of truth about the Nine Kingdoms' fall. You never intended to repair the prison, he said as they reached the chamber's entrance. The trials weren't about restoration at all. No, Astrid admitted, sealing the door behind them with ice. They were about preparation. For what must come next. The knowledge chamber was a perfect sphere of crystal, every surface inscribed with text that shifted and changed as they watched. In its center floated the broken crown, pulsing with the last remnants of 9 kingdoms worth of power. The void cannot be contained forever, Astrid explained, her voice heavy with millennia of guilt. Each binding only delays the inevitable. But the archive showed you the pattern, didn't it? What happens when you combine summer's light with winter's crown? Marcus held up the sword, watching how its golden light interacted with the crown's silver-blue glow. They were never meant to be separate. Summer and winter, creation and preservation, the 9 kingdoms tried to choose one over the other. That was their mistake. And now you face the same choice they did, Astrid said softly. But with fuller knowledge. The chamber shuddered as void beings assaulted its walls. Through the crystal, Marcus could see both realms beginning to merge, his world's sky becoming visible through tears in reality, the void reaching hungry tendrils toward that precious warmth. 3 options, he said, understanding finally clicking into place. Repair the crown, restore the prison, and maintain the cycle until it inevitably fails again. Or let the void win, consume both realms, start reality anew from nothing. And the third? Astrid asked, though she already knew. Marcus raised the sword. Break the pattern entirely. Use summer's light to transform winter's crown into something new. Not a prison, but a bridge. Yes, Astrid breathed. But the cost? Everything, Marcus finished. The 9 kingdoms' power, your immortality, my connection to my own realm, all of it used to transform the void rather than contain it. To face darkness, not with more darkness, but with light, Astrid agreed. To end eternal winter with eternal dawn. But it will change both realms forever, in ways we cannot predict. And we will not survive to see what emerges. The chamber's walls began to crack as reality itself strained against the void's assault. Marcus looked at the sword in his hands, the crown floating before him, and the queen who had orchestrated everything to reach this moment. You knew, he said. From the moment the crown chose me. This was always the only way. I suspected, Astrid corrected. But the choice had to be yours, freely made, with full understanding. That's what the trials were really about. Not proving worth, but gaining knowledge. Marcus laughed suddenly. You know what the cruelest part is? I finally have proof that all my archaeological theories about ancient civilizations were right, and I won't be able to publish any of it. Astrid's smile held both sadness and pride. Perhaps not. But you'll do something better. You'll write the next chapter of history instead of just uncovering the past. The chamber's defenses failed. Void stuff poured through the cracks, reality warping around them. Marcus raised the sword one final time, its light blazing brighter than ever. Together, he asked. Astrid placed her hands on the crown. Together. Marcus brought the sword down, not to break the crown further, but to merge with it. Summer's light met winter's power, and for a moment, he understood everything, the true nature of the void, the deeper pattern that governed all reality, the reason the 9 kingdoms had fallen and why their sacrifice had been necessary but not sufficient. Most importantly, he understood what came next. The crown and sword fused, power exploding outward in a wave of light that was neither warm nor cold, but something entirely new. Marcus felt himself dissolving, becoming part of that power. The last thing he saw was Astrid's smile as she too surrendered to the transformation. Their consciousness expanded, merged, transformed. They became the bridge between summer and winter, dark and light, what was and what could be. The void was not destroyed, but changed, its endless hunger becoming endless possibility. In the ruins of a Norse temple in the mortal realm, Emma Larson found a strange crystalline formation that defied analysis. Its light was like nothing ever recorded, and in its depths, patterns shifted in ways that inspired unprecedented breakthroughs in physics and archaeology alike. And in quiet moments, when the light hit it just right, some claimed they could see 2 figures in that crystal, an archaeologist and a queen, eternally caught in the moment of choosing to break the pattern, choosing to trust that what came after would be worth the sacrifice. The old stories spoke of 9 kingdoms bound in ice. The new stories would speak of 2 realms bound by dawn, and the moment when winter's crown and summer's light became something altogether new. It wasn't an ending. It was a transformation. And somewhere in the spaces between moments, Marcus Vail finally wrote his paper, not with words, but with the reshaping of reality itself. The end.